Hello, good evening. Welcome to the 11th Annual Wild Writers Festival. Yes, we're going to have a big celebration last year for the 10th, and we did it on Zoom, so it wasn't very conducive to doing big celebrations, but we're here for year 11. Nice to see everybody here. I'm Pamela Malloy, and I'm the creative director of the Wild Writers Festival, and I'm very happy to be here. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the Wild Writers Festival takes place on the Haldimand Tract land promised to the Haudenosaunee peoples of 6 nations, which includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. This is the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabeg, and Haudenosaunee peoples. We gratefully acknowledge these indigenous nations for their ongoing guardianship of this land. We agree to peaceably share in the responsibility for stewardship of this land, its waters, and all of its biodiversity. So yes, it's great to be back in person and not on Zoom. I don't think a lot of us will be missing the Zoom years. But one thing that it has taught us to do is actually that we can do things online. And tonight we are actually live streaming the event. So half of you are here and half of you are online. So welcome to those people who are joining us from the comfort of your home. We're glad to have you. I also want to talk about the new quarterly because, as well as being the creative director of the festival, I'm also editor of the new quarterly, and I forgot to bring a copy up here to show you. So I think all of you will now have to stop at the merchandise table and have a look at the new quarterly. It's a quarterly magazine. We publish fiction, nonfiction, and poetry 4 times a year, and yes, people do ask how often we get published. And we have a special festival rate of $29, which is for a subscription, and it gives you a free current bonus issue. So please check us out. And now to the festival. Of course, we can't have a festival without the financial support of our funders and our donors who really keep this festival going. A special thanks to Amanda Knapp from the RBC Wealth Management for sponsoring this portion of the festival. And thanks to our partners at Wordsworth Books and the Balsillie School of International Affairs. There's also some individuals that I'd like to thank, including our team of volunteers led by Taylor Holmes and Sarah Cayley. Thank you to Lillian Bass, Lara El-Bakawi, and Evelyn Decker for their work on the festival committee. Thank you to our co-op student, Navina Young, for her work on the festival admin and marketing. And a huge thanks to Carol Motas, who's managing all the logistics for getting the authors here and figuring out their accommodations. And a very special thanks to our managing editor and festival manager, Eleni Zapsis, who is in charge of operations. This is Eleni's first year in the role, and although she's volunteered with us in the past, she's done an absolutely amazing job in her capacity of festival manager this year, especially as we come back to figuring out how to do live events again. She's kept the machine running, and she does it with a smile on her face, so I am very grateful for her efforts here. And she did it this week with 2 grant deadlines as well, so I'm not sure if that smile is kind of permanently frozen on her face. Thank you, Eleni. And finally, I'm just grateful to the writers who come today and who will come over the weekend to our festival. We're all re-entering the world in different ways, and I appreciate how much it takes for these writers to be out in the wild again, so I thank you as well. To begin our program tonight, I'm going to invite the winners of our 3 writing contests to do a reading for us. The New Quarterly does 3 annual contests, and we have a cash prize as well as publication in the magazine. And we also invite them to come and attend the festival and do a reading from their winning piece. And we're thrilled that all 3 of them are able to join us here tonight, which is really a treat. So I'll introduce them one at a time, they'll come up and do the reading, and then we'll go on to the next one. So first up is our Peter Hinchcliffe Fiction Award winner, Sandhya Thakrar, for her story, Cavity Nest. Sandhya holds a PhD in philosophy from Yale University, where she wrote her doctoral dissertation on romantic love. Her literary writing has recently appeared in Brick and Southern Humanities Review. She was born and raised in the prairies, and she now lives in Toronto with her husband and their 6-year-old. One of the adjudicators had to say this about her story. Cavity Nests is an intimate story of a woman who returns home to clear out her recently deceased mother's home. It's a timely story, stylistically impressive, with sharply drawn characters. Please help me welcome Sandia to the stage.
So I'm going to read the first section and part of the second section of Cavity Nests. As she emerged from the grove of cherry trees, where the flowers had blossomed and the ground was thick with petals, she saw a naked old man scrubbing himself with a rag. Out of respect, she turned away, though she did not walk away, as he was standing right next to the wide footpath that led through the park and back to her mother's street. While she waited, she sipped her tea and observed how the park had changed since she had left the neighborhood. Children could still be heard shrieking on the playground, but the colorful equipment was now hidden by a row of portable toilets. The wooded area she had once pretended was a fairyland was now hung with tarps and towels, and the rink where she had learned to skate was now haunted by addicts and the odd outreach worker. The park was still surrounded by expensive Victorian houses and a long stretch of stylish shops and restaurants, but at its center was now an extensive homeless encampment. Taking a sip of her tea, she looked back toward the footpath. The old man had not yet finished, so she took another sip and looked away again. At the wilted, weedy edge of a nearby cluster of tents stood a tall needle drop box, and not far from it, a middle-aged white man was dancing serenely on top of an outspread wedding sari, his eyes closed and his hips swaying to the sitar music emanating from the boombox in front of him. She imagined her mother bringing this dancing man a freshly prepared plate of hot food, neither flattered nor offended by his appropriation, and moved less by a sense of charity than by a passion for flavor. Her mother was dead now, and her mother's home a trophy for the local realtor with whom she would meet that day, having flown to her hometown the previous evening to arrange for the emptying, cleaning, and listing of the house. She swallowed the last of her tea and slipped her mug into her bag, then lowered her eyes and walked toward the footpath. She was conscious of the old man's dignity, but also of everything she had to accomplish before flying back to her job and her family the next day. She reached the footpath and, still looking down, turned in the direction of her mother's street. A cyclist heading the opposite way swerved to avoid her and swore loudly at her inattention. When she looked up in surprise, the cyclist was already speeding away, but the naked old man was standing directly in front of her, his dingy gray rag in his hand and his bright blue eyes on her face. She ducked her head and darted down the footpath, but not before it registered with her, and apparently also with him, that he was, or rather that he had been, more than 2 decades prior, her first and favorite university professor. By the time she reached her mother's street, the initial recognition had bloomed into full remembrance. The naked old man was not indeed that old. When he had taught her how to think, how to analyze and evaluate, how to read Wittgenstein and Heidegger, he had been the age she was now. He had known everything she had wanted to know at the age of 18, and yet he had never quite known how to pronounce her name. She had memorized and meditated on all his arcane remarks, tracked down and pored over all his obscure reading recommendations, devoted her time and her heart to all his enigmatic writing prompts, and winced at all the ways he addressed her during his office hours. As she had achieved and advanced through the years, earning the esteem of her peers and a tenured position in her field, she had oftentimes heard his voice in her mind, goading her. And now, it seemed, he lived in a park and bathed in full view of the neighborhood. Approaching her mother's house and fumbling for her keys, she saw a bluebird swoop into a rotted-out hole in one of the many old trees on the property. She opened the front door and immediately turned her head to draw in her breath. The air inside the house pushed against her face like a pillow. The night before, and even earlier that morning, she had taken in as much of that air as she could, soothed by its medley of fried cumin seeds, mildewed books, and sweated-in silk. Now, she found it a stale, suffocating miasma. She rushed in to open the downstairs windows and then the second and third story windows, but even as the breeze displaced the odor, her breathlessness did not ease. She rested her damp forehead against an upstairs corridor wall and pressed her clammy palms against the wainscoting, feeling somehow thinned out, weightless. Running her fingers over the familiar nicks and ridges in the wood, she felt her way into her old room and sat down. At the rosewood desk where she sat, there was a framed photograph, a copy of which she had kept with her ever since leaving home. In it, she and her parents stood in front of their first real Christmas tree. They had always participated in the festive season, baking cardamom shortbread and placing wrapped gifts under their cherished 9-foot night-blooming jasmine bush. But that year, at her youthful insistence, they had brought home their very own tree-lot Douglas fir and trimmed it with tinsel, tiny blinking lights, and all the academic medals it would hold. She had made so many of her good decisions under the auspices of that photo, attending the local university so that she could stay with her recently widowed mother while completing her bachelor's degree, majoring and then pursuing a doctorate in her favorite professor's discipline, applying for and accepting a job in the department where she then met her husband. She had taken what she was given and made it all her own, weighing her options, choosing for herself, and establishing her life. A wave of nausea overcame her, and she vomited into the dustbin next to the desk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandy. That was a beautiful reading. Next we have Hale Gaderi. I pronounced the first name right? Did I get the second name right? Okay, sorry. She won the Nick Blatchford Occasional Verse Contest. Hale has a MFA in creative writing from the University of Guelph, and her work has been published in various literary journals. Fuse, her memoir of mixed race identity and mental health, was published in spring 2021. Her debut collection of poetry, Rebellion Box, is due out in 2023, and in 2024, her collection of short stories, Widow Fantasies, is set to be published. A contest adjudicator had this to say about her winning poem. This poem moved me without striving to. The tone is tender despite its dark theme. Please help me welcome Hale to the stage.
Hi everyone, it's lovely to be here. So I'm going to be reading Rebellion Box, Fort Henry, Kingston, 1837. Ask your husband about the honeybees. I may have an affinity for things that drone and drown out. On the way here, everything was so green it hurt. The trees practically threw themselves on the road. And to think, only days ago I'd been worried about my nose most of all. Now John's been hung and the rest of us rot and cut away at wood stove. Just rest and fleas for the foolish. I know some of us may have stepped into battle thinking only about valor, liberty, winning. It's easy to drown in these abstracts, but it's a dangerous road to follow. I've seen how brave men hurt so easily. Tell Mary I think of her often. It can hurt to think of myself like this, all stone and soot. But rest assured, my present circumstance is not finite. Every road leads home. It's true, our troops sat in that tavern and may have felt some degree of foreboding already. We drown our fear, glass after glass. I admit I was afraid to think about Mary, home, honeybees and my broken nose about to fall off my face from want of attention. I know I hurt the most remarkable people, God, Mary. I will drown my primitive conditions. I've managed to create. I rest in dirt and root myself to the root of her. I may be the most pressing of hopeless things because road after road, and I still brandish youth like a shotgun. Road after road leads to finding something to do about all this time on my hands. I dovetail my work. I may be the most diligent of craftsmen. All this time can hurt, weigh black and blue in the middle of my face. The rest, the luxury of a blue cotton dress. The rest can drown like Marzipan Creek pebbles, July's sweetgrass true. Drown and wait, because all that talk and rallying, it cleared a road. I won't stand for futility. There are so many reasons to rest your beliefs here, not one of us has. I write home about paying debts on time, mending the fence. I write to avoid hurt, boredom, being forgotten. I write you about the bees. You may remember the summer we cleared your husband's land. May came hard, and the bees came early. I was stung twice. It hurt. But Mary was in blue, and it was something else to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Halle. And finally, we have Tom Vernon, who is winner of the Edna Stable Personal Essay Contest for his essay, "The Plague Came with No Direction." Tom Vernon is a writer, an actor, an academic. Guernica will publish his second novel, "I Met Death and Sex Through My Friend Tom Muley," in 2024. One contest adjudicator commented, "Crisp and clear-eyed, the essay reveals the intense challenges of his experiences with writing that is virtuosic and full of profound humanity." Please help me welcome Tom to the stage.
Those are very kind words. Very kind educators. Yeah. Thank you, Pamela, and New Quarterly for having me. I'm going to read it on my laptop here. I'm going to jump around a little bit in the essay, which I hope you get to read. It's really kind of a journey essay, and so I'm going to give you the beginning and then jump to some other parts. The plague came with no directions. A few years ago, I got stuck in a field of thorns in the Pyrenees. I was there to do research for a novel on the years of exile endured by German literary philosopher Walter Benjamin. He and I were outrunning catastrophe and found ourselves on that same twisted path of wild rosemary and sage. We had our reasons. The Jewish Benjamin had the Gestapo hot on his trail. I had demons. The trail had been carved over centuries by smugglers. Contraband was secreted up from the port of Lisbon and deeper into Europe. The persecuted and criminal were secreted to safety. Spanish rebels and fascists smuggled fighters and weapons not 5 years before Benjamin found himself there. I knew this history. It never occurred to me that I might die exploring it. It never occurred to me that I would find a metaphor for what it's been like to live with HIV and trauma. I'd come to hike that trail, too, to smell the smells, kick the dust, and feel the ache of the climb. Unlike Benjamin, I was in good shape. He had a heart condition. I run 2 hours at a stretch. He had a Belize that he wouldn't let anyone else touch. I had a sandwich and some water. Benjamin had Lisa Fitgo to guide him, me, the iPhone GPS. On the phone, the trail was a purple-blue line. My location was a blue dot. As long as I kept the blue dot on the purple line, I'd get where I was going. As long as Benjamin made stops to catch his breath, he'd make the Spanish border. For what we intended, we were good to go. Then the trail ended. In my family, the ship was always sinking. It was clear from the get-go. There's a snapshot of me at about 3, backed up against the side of the house, baseball cap cockeyed, forearms cocked to the camera, ready for attack. I knew the drill even then. Duck my parents' knee-jerk need to suspect, accuse, and shame each other, the world, their kids. They fucked hard but landed punches, and furniture harder. From the front porch, we would peek through the slit in the living room curtain. Mom shoved the 8-foot sofa into Dad. He didn't respect her, she screamed. The sofa crashed into him, but then he'd return the favor, pinning her to the wall until she screamed she couldn't breathe. I got you, babe. They gave as good as they got. In 1987, when I was with Raphael, I got an HIV test for kicks. It came back positive. You're going to die, the doctor told me. July 31st, 1987. Later that night, Madonna belted Live to Tell on stage at Soldier Field, and I hid in plain sight among 50,000 people. Mom and Dad were the first people I told, thinking he knew a safe bet. My dad took out a life insurance policy on me. He was the beneficiary, but I was to pay the premiums, and I did. I decided to do everything I could to make it as an actor and live as high a quality of life as I could until my time ran out. I have the note I wrote to myself to prove it. It didn't matter. I was dead already. AIDS panic confirmed my worthlessness. A year or so after testing positive, I found another oasis, a magazine emblazoned with "Living with AIDS." I stopped in my tracks. Two muscle-bound hunks on the cover grinned at me. I circled the magazine rack, played it smooth an inch closer. My heart thumped, my brow sweat. Talk about a paradigm shift. I'd never seen or conceived of living and AIDS in the same breath. A door opened and I flew through. In 1988, my brother Mike asked Susan, a single mom with 2 kids, to marry him. She said yes, but her marriage blood test came back HIV positive. Mike tested negative, yet he refused to dump her. She'd gotten the virus through blood transfusions during cancer treatments in the 1970s. Mom counseled that Susan and me were threats to public health. We belonged in concentration camps. A few years ago, I visited a young naturopath who had no idea that there was a time when there were no effective treatments for HIV. For a long time, her not knowing is my fault, in part. Shame shut me up and shut me down. If I don't speak, how would she know? That people became skeletal almost overnight, that they started missing work, had few hospital stays, and then cashed out life insurance policies, and disappeared? She hadn't heard Susan's cough or her terror, but I'm still here. If I don't let her and you know what it was like, then who is going to? Susan's dead, Billy's dead, my Arkansas cousin too. 39 million and counting have dropped off. 37 million are living with HIV right now. Many without guaranteed access to treatment and medicine, and often criminalized. If not me, who? You have to know that a plague came with no directions and saved my life. Everybody's got their HIV. All we got to do is take the next right step. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Wow, there's a lot of really good work that comes out of our contest, which I can think you would agree with me is shown tonight. Thank you very much, all 3 of you, for those readings. Really beautiful. I encourage you all to take a subscription so that you could read each of those pieces in full in our upcoming issue. So you can have a chance to think about those things, the issues that were raised. Thank you. Okay, so tonight it is my great pleasure to welcome Heather O'Neill, and who will be in conversation with Farzana Doctor. And I, like most of you, are really excited about this tonight. To begin, Farzana Doctor is a Toronto-based author, activist, and registered social worker psychotherapist. She has published 4 critically acclaimed novels, including 7, which Ms. Magazine described as fully feminist and ambitiously bold, and was shortlisted for the Trillium and Evergreen Awards. Her new poetry collection, You Still Look the Same, which Quill and Choir has called a powerful, unnecessary collection that breaks silences, was just released in May of 2022. And I should say that Farzana will be with us tomorrow on the poetry panel. If you are around and wanting to hear more about her work, please come and join us. She's also part of our podcast series, Parallel Careers, where she talks about her life as a writer and her work as a workshop leader. So if you have a chance to check out our podcast series, Parallel Careers, I encourage you to do so. Heather O'Neill is a novelist, short story writer, and essayist. Her best-selling novel, The Lonely Hearts Hotel, won the Paragraphe Hugh MacLennan Prize for Fiction and was longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction and CBC's Canada Reads. Her previous work, which includes Lullabies for a Little Criminal, The Girl Who Was Saturday Night, and Daydreams of Angels, was shortlisted for the Governor-General's Literary Award for Fiction, the Orange Prize for Fiction, and the Scotiabank Giller Prize for 2 years in a row. She has won CBC's Canada's Reads and the Danuta Gleed Award. Born and raised in Montreal, O'Neill lives there with her daughter. And I'll just say that Heather's journey here tonight began on a cold day in February when I was in Montreal visiting my daughter, and I went into a bookstore and I saw this figure clad in top to tail in wool, scarf, a full-length coat, and I saw that she was signing books, and I had no idea who it was because she was so kind of covered. So I sort of went up and was sort of sneaking up on her and kind of looking sideways at the book to see who it was that was signing books. And I said to my daughter, I think that's Heather O'Neill, and my daughter's a big fan, so we were sort of standing around skulking and waiting for a moment, and as you do in bookstores, as I apparently do as in bookstores. So I grabbed a moment and I went up and I said, hi, Heather, are you Heather O'Neill? And I said, I'm Pamela Malloy, I'm a director of the festival. Will you come to our festival? And what'll do? And she said, yes, I would love to. And I was thrilled. And then a couple of months went past before I got back to her because, it was COVID and who knew what we were doing. So then I contacted her again. I said, I still want you to come to Waterloo. Would you come? And she said yes. So I'm very thrilled that visit to the bookshop paid off for us all. Please help me welcome Farzana Doctor and Heather O'Neill tonight.
Hello? No.
Do we have to do anything to turn this? Oh, we're on. Okay.
I
Okay.
haven't quite started working yet. Hello?
Is it on?
No.
I think it's on now.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, now it's on.
Were you doing those signings like outside in the cold? Is that why you were all
No,
covered up?
I had just gone into this bookstore to sign some stock for them, and I was in the back, and yeah, I just went, and I have to be careful in a bookstore, especially in Montreal, so I don't have to talk to people, or no one recognizes me. And then, I was telling the story last night, and then I was, because I was like, I'm going to Waterloo, and I was in a bookstore, and this woman came up to me, and she was like, are you Heather O'Neill? And I should have said no, but I said yes, and now I'm going to Waterloo.
You were in disguise. So it's a pleasure to be able to talk to you about your book.
Thank you.
I've been thinking about this book since I've been, reading it and thinking about all the questions. And, one of the things that really struck me was that it was really fun to read. And I wondered, was it fun to write?
Yeah, a lot of people ask me that. It actually was fun to write, but I find writing fun in itself. I'm always amused. I just amuse myself when I write, and I'm always, my daughter actually, she doesn't live with me anymore. She lives across the street, in the building across the street. We've separated. But she would always comment on that, because when I would write, I'd just start laughing, and she's like, oh, you're amusing yourself again, Mother, with your own ideas. I'm like, this is just, I just laugh at my characters because they're always so badly behaved. And I try and kind of contain them, and but they just kind of, I've always thought of fictional characters as being real people. And even when I was little, that was one of my original reasons I wanted to be a writer, was because when I would read books, I always thought that what was happening in the book seemed like real life, and then everything else seemed like ridiculous. And I was always wanted to get home from school and get back to like reality, which was in the books. And then I remember I read Anne of Green Gables, and that was when I just fell in love the first time with a fictional character. And I told my friends I couldn't play with them anymore because I had a new friend who like I got along with so much better, and we had more in common, and like I just... So yeah, I do enjoy my characters.
Good. Okay. And you didn't contain them in any way. Well, let me just ask you about this. So you do a deep dive into, girls and women's relationships, and particularly like how toxic they can be and how like obsessive they can be. Mm-hmm. So what was exciting for you about that, about making your characters so obsessive and toxic? And fun.
Well,
yeah.
Their relationship was funny to me because I didn't realize it was going to be the center of the book. Originally, my original inspiration was I had always wanted to write a book about the French Revolution. When I was a teenager, I wrote like a list of books that I wanted to write, and one was called The French Revolution, and that's where I was on the list. And I was like, the French Revolution, because I had just been fascinated by that story, particularly because it was all these characters. And when I read up on it when I was young, I realized they were all writers, and it gave me sort of a sense of what writers could do. Particularly, I was fascinated by Robespierre because he was an orphan, but he just had this wonderful gift of speech and writing, and he just wrote poetry, and then people would take him to meet aristocrats, and he even read for like Marie Antoinette and Louis at one point. And then with this ability to write, he just kind of galvanized all the unrest in France and started this revolution and created the Reign of Terror. And I was like, wow, if he can, that's so inspiring to me. If he can get that far, so can I. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. But But then I had this idea that I would set it in Victorian Montreal, and all the characters from the French Revolution would be little girls. So I'd have a little girl who's the Marquis de Sade, and a little girl who's Robespierre, and et cetera, like one who would be Georges Danton and one Jean-Paul Marais. And then, I created Sadie and Marie, and they were not supposed to be the main characters. They were just these two I thought they would be, actually I created them to be antagonists, that they would hate each other. But every time I put them on the page together, they were just they fell in love with each other, because they were like, they were both sociopaths and like crazy and monstrous, and they were like, this is the only person who's my equal. And they were like, no, we'll not be secondary characters, we are the main characters of this book. So there was really nothing I could do.
Did you want to argue with them, like when they were talking to you in that way? Because I've also had characters who have told me things, and I'm like, no way. Did you argue back, or did you just listen to them?
I kind of listened to Mary Antoine, but Sadie I argued with. She was the hardest character to write because she's based on someone so problematic, and she's so problematic in herself, and she's like, I don't know, just psychopathic, she's narcissistic, she's like an art monster, she cares for no one essentially but herself. And so it was very hard to, like, she would just do things, and I was like, no, you'll alienate the reader, for God's sakes, we can't put that in. So it was like, it was very a delicate balance with her, because I also wanted, I love to create characters that nobody should love, but then I create them so that the reader just falls in love with them. Okay, so talk about that. That was one of my questions. So that is really fun, that they are characters that you kind of hate, but then you start to fall for them. Mm-hmm. So are you aware of like what that process was like for you? What did you do to make them likable? Or to balance that out? Well, that was kind of why at the beginning of the book I described them as children. So you can see, like, and at 12 years old, which is where society kind of comes for girls and tries to put them on some path that's not sort of intuitive to who they are, but it's just sort of societal norms of girlhood. So by creating them when they were little, it kind of was a devious way to make you like the psychopath. So it's like when Sadie's, like murdering a cat, it's still, oh, well, she's only 12. And Marie with all her antics and just her spoiled behavior. So that was kind of how I introduced them, and then they grow up and become, and like anyone, when you know them when they're little, then you're sort of attached to their journey.
Right, and we also understand like their context and how they may have ended up like
Exactly,
that.
and the sort of, and they were both sort of in position where they weren't raised with a lot of, love. Mary Antoine, her father's so indulgent and spoils her that he's a bad father. Also, he's so promiscuous and a philanderer and just gives her this image of women that's kind of disgusting. And then Sadie, her mother, despises her because she has this macabre side to her.
Right. Do you want to read from the beginning of the book so we can hear a little bit about them as girls?
Okay, well, this is just the first chapter. So we just meet them in the middle of a gang, of their gang. I like to say this book starts with a bang. You'll see why. So they're in one of these elaborate games that go too far. In a labyrinth constructed out of, this chapter's called The Duel. I don't know why I need to tell you that. In a labyrinth constructed out of a rose bush in the Golden Mile neighborhood of Montreal, two little girls were standing back to back with pistols pointing up towards their chins. They began to count out loud, taking 15 paces each. Marie Antoine and Sadie Arnett had met in the park on Mount Royal behind their homes when they were little girls of 12 years old. It was 1873. The two of them seemed to have been born with the same amount of thick hair on their heads, except that Sadie had dark brown hair and Marie's was blonde. Sadie had large, dark eyes that were almost black, cheekbones that were already high, and lips so dark red they looked as though they had makeup on them. Marie had blue eyes and a complexion that looked porcelain and a mouth that was the lightest pink. It was almost as though there were two dolls that were being marketed to girls, one fair, one dark. That day, Marie had on a white tailored jacket with blue embroidery down the side. It fell just below her knees, revealing her white stockings and pretty blue leather shoes. Sadie had on a burgundy hat with a black ruffle that was about the size of a cupcake. It was propped on her head uselessly, but at least it didn't take away from the impression her black velvet coat with burgundy buttons made. She had small black shoes with black bows on the toes. The pistols had roses engraved on the handles. A maid looked down from the second-story window. She was buttoning up her chemise and whistling. From her perspective, she could see into the labyrinth and its clearing in the middle. At first, she doubted what she was actually seeing. It did not seem possible at all. There is always something surreal about children embarking on something dangerous. They are oblivious to the danger. They act as though they are about to defy all the laws of physics. For a moment, the adult is suspended in the realm of childhood disbelief. But the maid broke the spell. She ran down the stairs with only her drawers on and her chemise half undone. Her red hair flew behind her as though she were carrying a torch. She ran out through the labyrinth screaming. Finally, she arrived there. She stood in the middle and opened her mouth to tell the two girls to stop. At the precise moment, they both spun around and fired their guns at each other. As the two bullets hit the maid and she fell to the ground, the words alerting the girls to their idiocy were forever silenced.
Thank you. So, I want to talk about narcissism for a bit, because this is something we're talking a lot about these days. Like, there's a whole bunch of like Netflix shows about narcissists, and every time I open up Instagram, there's some like psychobabbling type talking about narcissism. So what is like exciting for you about writing about narcissism?
My parents were both narcissists, like to an incredible degree. Even the way they treated me as a child was so bizarre. Like when I was 7, my mother told me she had decided that she didn't want to be a mother anymore, and that I was preventing her from achieving greatness, whatever greatness was. So she was like, and I hadn't seen my father in years and years, and she was like, well, your father's out of prison, so it's perfect time for you to go live with him. So she just sent me to Montreal to live with my father. And then my father was like a criminal, and then he started training me to be a criminal. And but one of the main things I did was he would get me to, whenever he had to go to court, he would dress me up like really cute and put like bows in my hair. And so I would sit and look at the judge and be like, please don't put my dad in jail, sir. And then he was just like, if I bring you to court, like I get off. And then his friends too were like, well, let me borrow Heather too. So I would just go with all his friends and work as this alibi. And then I'd say that they were babysitting me that night and not actually robbing a store. So anyways, I was just raised by these narcissists who never, like everything they did was in their own interests, which, and they're very charming, charismatic people, unfortunately. So they were always like, they always had friends and were surrounded by people who kind of liked that aspect.
They're lovely in small doses.
They're so
they're
lovely.
Fun in
they're
small
so
doses.
lovely, but you don't want to be raised by one, or they will just.
Yeah.
And I was interested. Okay, but that's another story. So that's my original, of just my life surrounded by narcissists. I mean, maybe I'm a narcissist too. Who could say? That's for the others. That's for my daughter. She'll be here in 10 years. My mother was a narcissist. You not believe the ridiculous life we led. She wrote these ridiculous books of people murdering each other. Where was I? Oh, but I love the idea of, because this is set in Victorian times, so I thought it was so interesting to have characters of women who were violent and narcissists, because at that time, everything about women's nature was so codified, and women were supposed to be passive. Yeah. They were just supposed to be obsequious to men. The only point of their life was to be married. And then you had manuals of how they were supposed to behave, and how they were supposed to smile, talk to people. And it was all about making other people feel comfortable. And then I found, even growing up, you just are told so many ways to behave as a young woman, which is essentially make sure you put others first. Make sure you put others first. And that's just training you for eventually this life of unpaid labor. But I was like, I just want characters to put themselves first. Because it's such a wonderful feeling, and it's so revolutionary as a woman in a lot of ways to just think of your own desires and realize, even when you have a kid, everybody tells you the child comes first, the child comes first. And I was always like, no way. My child and I were equal, or just both human beings. I'm never going to give up my agency to somebody else. So I liked that. I liked the idea of these women, and they also, none of them, because of the time, have any interest in being married, because they know that in that time their partners would be their fathers. They would have no more actual rights as a human being. Right. And they're all ambitious. They won't get married. And I'm just interested to see what they do with those Victorian constraints and these giant ambitions. And is it narcissism? On some levels it is, but also some of the characters, it's just taking themselves seriously. And I always found as a young woman, nobody lets you take yourself seriously.
Right. Do you want to read the section? So there were a couple of places where I really noticed how you talked about the erasure of women, and also from history. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if you wanted to read another piece about that. I can tell you which pages they're on if you want, but you can read whatever you want.
Do you want me to read your thing, or?
Sure.
What is that?
It's page 192.
190.
I think that's the one where she talks about marriage. And then there's another piece about women in history later on, if you feel like. Is it there?
Where is it? I see things with horses and 25 blonde children dressed in black suits.
I might not have the... Oh, it's right here. I might not have the right page for you. Okay, read something else. Go for 432 if you want.
Okay. 432.
Yeah, the piece about how these women of the revolution were erased. If you'd like.
Do we have the same edition?
Oh, I don't know.
What page are you on?
432.
Oh, let me just pass it over here.
This is very funny.
All the names of women who had participated and fought in the revolution were erased. They had been written in invisible ink, and then the history of men had been written over theirs in indelible ink. In order to see the history of the women, you had to put the page up against the window and let a light shine through it. Then the history might dance like a shadow puppet against the wall.
It's beautiful metaphors, right, in there? And I heard some like echoing of that kind of idea throughout the book. Do you want to? Is that something you want to talk about? Why that was important?
Of women's
Erasure and
yeah, it's kind of, we always have this idea that women haven't done anything, but it's just everything they've done has been erased from history. And one of my choices, too, for choosing the Industrial Revolution or the Victorian era, it depends what country. Whenever I do like stuff in the States, they're like, Industrial era. We don't know what the Victorian era is. So the Industrial Revolution is seen as such a masculine era, and all the images of it are men going to the factories and men building things. Whereas, like, actually the factories were filled with women, and particularly young girls who were in very high demand because you could pay half price for them to work there. And they used the sort of nimbleness of the young girls to clean through the machines and to jump in and out and like remove little pieces of thread and whatnot, and they would just work them for 12 hours a day. So and at the end, when the factories closed, you would just see like waves of girls going by, and then young mothers would bring their babies to the factories, and they had these little like daycare things. So women were just a huge part of that time period and working in factories, but it's all erased for this image of the men. And it's just that with everything, even like in the French Revolution, there, like the original group of people who went up to Versailles to storm it was a group of fishmonger women, and they were all like, "We have had enough of this, let's go." And that kind of brought the revolution to Versailles, but then you never hear about those women. And also, even another thing too that I was interested in the book, because Victorian women, they were engaged in, they would do little like embroidery and embroidery circles and always doing these crafts. And they're kind of regarded as frivolous in art history. But when you actually look in the archive of what these women were doing, and the pillows, they're just extraordinary works of art and ceramics and paintings and stuff. So it's either anonymous or it's considered craft. So I was just very interested in for like doing a sort of history where there's this revolution and we're foregrounding the women, and I was like at the end, when the tale of this story is told, it will be through the tale of men. Mm-hmm. And even when you do anything, you get an idea or something eventually, and then if it's a good idea or a good type of essay, then it kind of gets copied, which is fine, but then it always ends up being attributed to a man who's started that movement.
And do you want to talk a little bit more about the French Revolution? I don't know very much about it, but it was really clear that there were certain characters that were inspired by real characters from that time, or real people. They're actually people, they're not characters. But do you want to talk a little bit about why those people inspired these characters and how you veered off and where you were really intentional about veering off?
Okay. So I talked about Robespierre, and then I've always been sort of interested in the Marquis de Sade, even though he's this monstrous human being who committed all sorts of heinous crimes while he was alive, because he just felt he should do whatever he wanted to do in life, and he was incredibly wealthy aristocrat. So anyways, he happened to be in prison when the revolutionaries stormed the Bastille. And they were like, oh, there's a writer in here. We will free you. And he's like, okay, even though he wasn't there for his writing at the time. He was there for like kidnapping and stuff. Terrible. But so they brought him into the fold, and he was writing. I mean, he had such a wonderful gift of writing, particularly plays. So he was writing speeches for all the revolutionaries until they sort of started putting two and two together, and they're like, can we actually, because he continued his grotesque behavior, and he just liked, and he thought it was all amusing that people were getting their heads cut off. He thought it was thrilling, and they were like, who is this guy? He's so, I think he's probably the worst aristocrat we could have found. He's like more excessive than even Marie Antoinette and her gang. So they kicked him out of the revolution. What is my point to this? Oh, yes.
So he inspires.
But what I was so fascinated in him, and one of the reasons too I had continued always, he just kept coming up with me because there were so many feminists in the 20th century who really engaged with the work of the Marquis de Sade, like from Simone de Beauvoir and Angela Carter, because they found in the Marquis de Sade's writing that he was the first person who looked at women outside of the maternal role. And they were like, his women are just as perverted and just as murderous and just as insane as the men. So they were like, this is interesting. So it's kind of counterintuitive, and it's always this problematic thing, but he was interested in philosophy of the bedroom, and if you could be completely free. So he wanted, one of the ways you became completely free was just to understand your own sexual proclivities, and just like, you know, I mean, for him it's like have the orgies, but for anyone else it's just like do what you want to do. So I thought it would be fascinating to have a girl who is a pornographer who is also interested in the philosophy of the bedroom, and she just goes around exploring sexual, like female desire and what it is for a woman to engage in sex, but not in a romantic way, not in a way that she wants to get married. So she just goes and lives in this brothel and has all these wild sort of like...
and she's always like, what's next? Like,
yeah, she's like this dominatrix, and all the men come, and she's like always like with her whips. And I mean, I actually found that part really beautiful to write. Like, I have such a strange aesthetic, but every time I saw Sadie in her like, you know, her black corsets with the boots and the whips, and each one is kind of like almost like a play that she's putting on in her room. So I found that really interesting and fun to write. And that was a character too, because I didn't know where she was going to go with her sexual experimentations and what her conclusion would be. So she was really interesting to write in that way, because I was always learning stuff from Sadie. So that's one. And then, I don't know, then there's like, then I have a character who's a middle-aged woman who's kind of a mentor, and she's based on Jean-Paul Marais, who was this horrible riff-raff, like malcontent, who nobody liked and was always just getting into trouble. But then when the revolution came, because sometimes in life you're like, why are these annoying people around? And then it's like, oh, they're here if we have revolution or war. And then like everybody, then all of a sudden Jean-Paul Marais started writing these like newsletters every day, and they were just like how they should kill the aristocrats and blood. We need more blood. And they became really famous, and all of a sudden he became like when he was killed, like a martyred figure, and they even had like images of Jean-Paul Marais like on crosses, because he was the new Jesus, whereas before he had really been, I can't even describe, like that guy you want out of the party, you know? But so my character based on him is this woman who runs a pharmacy, and she is
she helps women kill
she
their
helps
husbands.
Women kill their husbands, because she actually killed her husband. She poisoned her husband when she was young, and she like explains to them it was the greatest thing she ever did, and look how amazing life is. All you have to do is put a little arsenic in their glasses. And it's funny because I was reading that in the arsenic, they made this arsenic law in England at the time, And they made it illegal for women to buy arsenic because too many of them were killing their husbands.
And she ends up writing her own book about how you can kill your husband. And that made me think about, I can't remember her name now, but the fiction writer who wrote a book called How You Kill Your Husband, or 100 Ways to Kill Your Husband. Was that at all part of your consciousness as you were thinking about it? I'm going to have to Google it later.
Okay.
Or maybe someone who has a phone out there can do that. Okay, let me ask you something else. So you do a bunch of world building. It's 1873. You've got the Golden Mile, which is like a real place.
Yeah.
And then you've got the Squalid Mile, which isn't a real place.
It is, it's like, the Golden Mile is based on the Golden Square Mile, that's what it's called now. At the time, it was called like Uptown or Newtown because it was just being built. And it was actually like about 50 men in Montreal owned 75% of the wealth in Canada. And it was just like the 1%, and they were crazy. They just had so much money because Montreal then was really the industrial center of Canada. Anyway, so they moved from Old Montreal to create these magnificent mansions, because in Victorian times, a house was also like a place for balls. It was also just to show off of your neighbors, whoever had the biggest house.
Do those places still exist in Montreal?
About 30% of them, because actually they started going into disrepair like in the 20th century because nobody could maintain them. And then there was in the late 60s, there were people who were arguing that they should be given heritage status, but then the PQ was like, are you kidding? They were built by English people. Nothing built by English people gets heritage status. So they all kind of crumbled. However, there's still some magnificent ones. They're just so crazy looking. But then, so this area where the factories were, it kind of had a changing name. It didn't really have a name, but when I was researching it, it was so much harder to research. I had to go deeper into the archives to find anything about what were the sidewalks like, what were the houses like, and every now and then I'd find a wonderful detail. Like I read once, if there was this alley and you would go down, there was a man who performed with his bear, and they would perform for children, which of course now it's totally dangerous. But at the time, whatever. Their kids are going to be squashed in the factories anyways. Let them have a good time. And little puppet shows and oyster stalls. And it just seemed this wonderful world. But it was filthy. Everything had this also description of filth.
Right.
So I was like, it needs its own name. So I shall call it the Squalid Mile. And so then it has the Squalid Mile and the Golden Mile, which are obviously at odds.
Right. And do you have any, with historical research, you do encounter all of these little gems and weird things. Were there any weird bits of research that you found that went in or didn't make it in? Just strange things that you encountered as you were doing research for this book?
That didn't make it in?
Or did, yeah.
Well, one of the things that I did, because one of my original reasons for wanting to write a Victorian novel was I was so fascinated by Victorian undergarments. I just found them so beautiful. I find the history of underwear really pretty. So I've been researching it, and Victorian underwear are just so fanciful, and there's just so many layers, and I sort of like the metaphor of that, where the women, before they were able to be undressed and in any sort of erotic encounter, they would just have to take off so many layers, so many buttons, so many ribbons. It's like, think twice, lady, think twice. Stop what you're doing. No, not that. But
I won't even wear something that has a zipper up the back because that's just too hard.
But anyway, so then I went, they have this large costume archive in Montreal where they keep every costume from every play or movie. Instead of just throwing it out, they archive it in this place. My daughter found it, and she is always going there with and we always just go there and play, and we have to come up with some idea for being in there. And I was like, I'm thinking of writing a Victorian novel, so I need to try these clothes on, so I have a sense of it. But really, it was just, we were like, this will be fun.
They let you try it on.
Yeah. And then like, they let us take them too. They're like, we do such crazy things. We just like make plays out on the street and videotape them and stuff. I'm just killing time. But so yeah, I put all the underwear on, and then the crinolines, which were these giant like cages that they wore under their dresses, and that I found so interesting, that these women actually were walking around in cages, and they were in, and so that metaphor appealed to me. So I put on my crinoline, and I was walking around, and then first I was just like knocking everything over in the room, and then I fell over and almost went down the stairs, and then I was like, I can't like function in this crinoline. So actually, all my characters, like throughout the novel, they're always like in the middle things, they topple over, or if they have to go to the bathroom, it's like whoops, or anything. If they drop something, it's like whoop.
It's fun. Pamela, will you let me know when we need to move to the Q&A, because I did not bring my phone up here? Yeah, when we have time. Okay. So let's talk about some of the characters that we meet in the Squalid Mile. So George is a really interesting character, non-binary character, who is kind of like the opposite to these sociopathic women, right? Kind of the moral center of the story.
Yeah, she's totally the moral compass of the novel. Like, she's the only one who, when you're kind of reading it, she's able to focus and not become because this revolution they start building becomes crazier and crazier, and like having more and more power. But she's the one who just is able to focus, and she's like the only one who's not a bad feminist, because they all become these really bad feminists, where they just start, particularly Marie Antoine, who kind of gets this job as a factory owner, and she's the only one in Canada who's a woman, but she just starts acting like a male factory owner, and even more excessive. But then George is like, no, the point is to dismantle all this, and so that everybody has more rights, and then like the girls in the factories have more rights and all that. But George is great. George is like really, I really like George. She's so much better than May, but
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, George is kind of like the break. Like, you get a little rest in George's character. And we also meet Mary Robespierre, who has a real function. And what were you trying to do with her, and also her counterpart from history?
Yeah, that was, what was I trying to do with Robespierre just created herself. She was such a little angry, but she's so talented. She's able to make these cakes, and she makes art with them. She's incredible, like flowers, and she has her own bakery. And that's her skill. She's just very gifted with her hands. And I love the femininity. I love how they were, I'm talking about my own book. This is a fabulous part. No, but I had a lot of intention behind them having very feminine attributes. Like, I didn't want, even the more feminine they are, the more violent they are. And her character is so closely linked with Marie Antoine, and whereas Marie Antoine, who's, Marie Antoinette, obviously, every time I described her, I described her the same way I was describing the cakes, because I wanted her to seem like edible. And because one of the things that I found so interesting when I was researching Marie Antoinette, and I was always kind of interested in her just because she had been given such a role when she was so young. She was only like 14 when she arrived in France. And so much of the revolution, there were so many pornographic pamphlets that they were everywhere about Marie Antoinette, and just about her sex life and these crazy scenarios that she had gotten into that were so explicit and grotesque. But they were using Marie Antoinette's body and sexuality to create this hatred of everybody at Versailles. And I thought that was fascinating to do with the body of a woman. And also, people don't realize that when she was executed at the guillotine. She was charged with high treason, of course, but also sex crimes and things she obviously did not do.
Right. I didn't know about that, and so that adds like this whole new understanding for those of you who have read the book or are going to read the book. Like, it just adds a whole new level of understanding about what Sadie's writing is about.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. Let me ask about twists. So there's a lot of fun twisting that happens towards the end, and we won't talk about the specifics because it's spoilers. But for me, that's often what will make a book memorable or like will really delight me. And they're hard to do, right? Twists are hard to do. That takes a lot of like thought and reworking. So can you talk about how you got to some of those twists? Yeah.
They were kind of hard. It was like I knew the twists that were coming, but I didn't know exactly how to put them in. And there's one twist that I still get surprised at. I'm like, oh my God, you're kidding me, when people remind me of it. I'm like, that happens?
Right.
What a twist.
And you forget.
Yeah, you totally forget. When did I? It's hard to say because you start building it and it's hard to know when things are happening, but I knew, they're sort of like two. I don't even want to give it away because you're not even supposed to know the twists are coming. But I knew they were there, but it's hard to balance them, and so you have to make it that it's secretive so that the reader does not guess.
Yes.
But then also so that when the reader hears it, then they go back and read the book again in their heads in a different way.
Yeah.
Which is why twists are fun, and why it's like it makes a book more memorable, because it forces the reader to actually experience the book twice.
Yes. So
it's a trick.
Do you have a process that, or like, is it just magic? Like, what allows you to, get the bright idea for the twists? I know it's not a formula or anything, but is there anything that you notice that you do that helps you to imagine the weird twist?
What is my process for that? No, it just kind of comes to me when I'm creating, like when I'm originally setting up the characters usually. Like when I write, what I usually do is just create the characters, and I just spend time with it, and I'll just like write, like just fill up a notebook full of details about them and find like what's working, what doesn't work, and also just create a tone for them. So usually within that, and then I'm also figuring out the plot at the same time, what they're going to do. And then the twists
do you start from character and then move towards plot, or I don't know?
Oh, it's so hard to say. I kind of had the scaffolding of the revolution for this one, so that I kind of held on to. It's funny too, because you don't actually, like, some people read the book and they don't even notice it's about the French Revolution at all. It's just kind of these little Easter eggs, but don't feel bad.
You can pick it up from some of the names, but if you don't know much about that, I mean, I had to go to Wikipedia and like read a little bit more deeply, So if you're not like completely aware of the intricacies of that history, you might miss pieces, I think.
I don't think you'd miss pieces of the actual story. Like, it's fully, because also
the link to the history.
We wanted it, me and my editor, we had talked about, like, we also wanted a book that existed fully on its own. Like, that's the importance of a retelling. Right. It has to exist fully as its own story, even if that retelling, you know nothing about it. Right. So it's almost just like as a scaffolding to play with, and you can have, and it just has different layers for different people.
Right.
What was the question? What comes first, character or plot?
Yeah.
They come kind of, I would say generally, I'm going to say the characters always come first. I have like a flash of the character, and what happened with this book, I had I saw this drawing of a ball in Montreal, and there was a drawing of, and it was like this ice ball, and everyone was in these elaborate costumes. And there was a little girl dressed as Robespierre. And then I was like, I just want her to be Robespierre. Like, what would it be like if she took her little skates off, and then she went and just became Robespierre? And that was like my first character.
Beautiful. That's the flash. You look at another piece of art and you get a flash. Yeah. Okay, let me ask you about genre, because you do write across genre. And this is just a selfish question, personal selfish question. Sometimes I'll be really obsessed with an idea, and I'm not really sure, like, is this just an article? Or is it a novel? Or is it a single poem? How much time am I really supposed to be spending on it? So what do you do for yourself when you start to get obsessed with an idea? How do you know it's a novel?
That's a hard one, because you can sometimes be wrong.
That's the problem.
I know, and you're just like, I was comparing the other day, like writing novels like Jumanji, like you go in, you don't know when you're coming out. You really just don't. You can be in there for years and years. Your friends are like, what happened to Heather? I don't know, she started a novel, she's gone. She's gone. Then you come out and it's like no time has passed for you, but you're like, you're not on this adventure.
You're still wearing the same clothes.
Yeah.
Hair is really long.
Yeah, so the difference between like what's a novel and what's a short story, I think I'm more naturally a novelist. Like sometimes I do write short stories when I have something that's so, something that's just very odd and just kind of, it just needs to, it's like a short little telling. And, but novels are just this trunks of magic where you can go on all sorts of discursive, like when you really want to play with themes for a long time, like that's when you go in a novel and you're working through all these different ideas. So a novel, but then it's like, and then I mean, I write a lot of nonfiction essays, and that's like a whole different.
And none of those, the content of those essays felt like they needed to be novels?
Actually, right now, because right now I'm working on an essay about like androids, particularly female androids in films, and like how they're always sex bots. And I'm also writing a short story about sex bots. So those are funnily working together.
And the next novel will be about sex bots?
No, that's it. Like, I don't want to write about sex bots for like 800 pages. Like, there's only so much you can say about a sex bot, right? Or maybe not. Maybe not.
It'll be a character, maybe a minor character in a future novel.
It's a lot of sex, you know? It's almost too much. I don't want to like, I think I've gone like as far as I can go with my like personal perversions before eventually people are like, she's gone crazy. This novel is just like smut.
So let me ask you about that. How was that for you to go maybe beyond where you've gone before in this arena that is so like taboo and, you know, uncomfortable for lots of people?
Well, the thing is, that's what, your sex scenes have to be great, and they have to also, great, but they have to have a point.
Yes.
Because with everything, it's like when you say, you drop an F-bomb in a movie, like you have to justify it, you really have to need it to be there. So when I have a sex scene, it has to be somehow pivotal to the themes and whatever. And my editor always cuts them down because she's like, this is absolutely wonderful, Heather, but it does not need to be a 10-page scene. I'm like, you're probably right. It's like, knock it down to one. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So I listened to an interview, one of your Zoom interviews, where you talked about how you write longhand. You want to talk a little bit about that, at what part of the process you're doing that, and when you stop, and anything else about the process you want to talk about?
Yeah, I just write in notebooks with my pen. I love it. I'm like a graphomaniac. There's nothing I find more gives me like this freaky little feeling of joy than watching like words coming out of the tip of the pen. It's like just magic. And even like it started when I was like 8, and for a birthday, I got a journal, and like since then, I'm just always like every day, I'm like, oh, coffee feels so good. I can't even explain it. It's like, anyways, I'm going too far. You're like, it's light. It's so good. So I fill up my notebooks, and then like when it gets like a bit too, like I have a lot of words, and I just transcribe them, and then I do all my editing on the computer. Right. But it's just fun because I write in a kind of messy way. Like I have all these ideas at once, so I'll have like, I just write scenes, and then everything's like all over the place.
And then you remember, oh, I've got a really good scene in that notebook that it might fit here. Let me transcribe it now.
What? No, I just transcribe everything. And then it's a big giant mess, and then I put everything where it's supposed to go, and then I read over it, and then I work on it. Like then that's just the scaffolding, which is never actually a complete novel because it's like the characters don't necessarily change, and then I work on building the characters changing and like how this affects them, right? Stuff like that, and add the details.
So how many notebooks did you fill for this one?
Oh my God, so many. Like they just pile up by my bed. And for a while I didn't know, because everyone was like, you're not supposed to throw away your notebooks.
Yeah, and some archivist wants them, right?
I know, but I was being buried with notebooks, like, because I wrote through my 20, like, just notebooks full of like unpublishable stuff, and then I was watching a documentary with some guy, and he's like, once my notebooks get up to here, I throw them out, and I was like, oh my God, you can throw your notebooks out, and I was just like putting them in like bags, like, and just dragging the bags like out of the shed. I'm like, notebooks, we're throwing them all away. And so, yeah, some archivists, like in 100 years, will be like, oh, where did all the notebooks go? But I can't live that way.
Right. Maybe you can just, make sure that it's on record that there are no notebooks so that the archivist isn't searching forever for them. Okay. Same interview that I listened to, you talked about ditching a novel in progress that you had written for a couple of years, and then it just wasn't working out and you ditched it. Mm-hmm. So I've done something like that. It's really, really painful. How do you know for sure?
I don't. I've actually, I've thrown out novels before, and then I'm so sure that I'm never going to go back to them. But then I do. Okay. Like the Lonely Hearts Hotel I had thrown out. I was just like, I can't. This is just like too crazy. It's too ridiculous. Like, who wants a novel about like clowns who are gangsters? How ridiculous is that idea? So I threw it out, and then like one day I had a plane ride from Vancouver to Montreal, and I was like, let me look at that. And it had been so much time that all of a sudden, like I was just for like the 6 hours, just chop, 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 and I had the whole, and when I was done, I was like, I have a novel. So now I'm thinking like there might have been something in that novel that I rejected.
So you'll go back to that one?
I think so. Mm-hmm. Eventually. I don't know. I have that problem with dating too. I always break up with people, then go back to them.
You need to like maybe process things over time, or see them, from the distance to realize that maybe it's a fit.
Yeah, but that's with the relationships, I'm always like, why? How did I get back into this? But I guess I...
And then they're mad at you at that point. At least with novels, they're not. They're just waiting.
They hate me. There's nothing like being dumped twice. To make somebody
now I
hate
have
you.
so many questions, but that is going to get us off track. I'll ask you later.
Okay.
So there's a lot in this novel about writing,
Mm-hmm.
because Sadie is a writer and is busy writing. I found myself like just kind of taking notes about bending the pages in some of those places. Maybe you would like to read some of those things and we can talk about it, I don't know. But, for example, Sadie talks about how you know when a book is finished, about endings. Also writing a book from the point of view of female desire and how amazing that is. And books as empowerment tools. These are some of the some of the themes that I was seeing as she was talking, you were talking about Sadie's writing. Do you want to talk about any of those ideas or read from any of those sections? I can tell you what page they are in my book, in my version.
Okay.
Okay,
What
so
page?
which of those themes
They are
were
the
you
same
interested in?
page. I'm just like, I don't.
How about 276, writing from the point of view of female desire?
276.
5 minutes.
This, or this, or this, just this?
Just wherever your eye wants to go.
There were such new possibilities in writing from a perspective of female desire that excited Sadie as an artist. Sadie wanted to put things in literature that had never been there before. In fact, putting experiences into books that hadn't been there before was the modus operandi of a writer. It was like being a butterfly collector. You didn't want the same common butterflies every collector had. You wanted the rare butterfly with black spots on its wings that only emerges at the witching hour and sheepishly tucks its antenna into the closing mouth of drowsy flowers.
So this whole book is written from the point of view of female desire.
This book? Yes, in a way it's kind of, yeah, definitely. Like even to the point and I was kind of, when I started I was wondering if there was, because it's kind of a Victorian novel and I'd read so many Victorian novels, I just loved that era in novels, just so much melancholia and self-obsessive whining. I just adore them. So I was like, what's going to be like to have a Victorian novel without a romance at the center, like a romance with a man, but then just that female friendship, and then also even the female friendships become quite eroticized, and I felt that was something that we don't actually just talk about. It's so taboo. Like when you're a young girl, like how sensual you are with other girls and how excited you get by just their touch or them playing with the hair. And yeah, so I just wanted that romance where they're just like physically attracted to each other also.
Okay, so we need to move to questions, I think, from the audience, yeah? Okay, so let's do that. Is there somebody who's got a microphone for people? Is that happening? Okay. Who has a question? Just put up your hand so the folks with the mics can come find you.
Not sure that, yes, okay, it is. Hi, I'm Cassidy. Nice to meet you. So you seem to me to be very in your element, and I was wondering if you feel you're at a point in your career and life where you can kind of let things flow in terms of your process, from process all the way to completion to getting a book published. Do you still feel like there's a big push and a big driving force there that you have to get things done, or do you feel at this certain point in your career that you can kind of just relax into your talents and just let it happen?
Wouldn't that be wonderful if humans were capable of that? No, I always feel like a sort of, I'm always very excited about the next one, and there's this thing with like, when I have an idea or an unfinished novel, then I just have to finish it. No, I'm not as anxious as I was when I was younger, because there is a sense that, yeah, at least I've done some novels. So, yeah, I mean, like and I'm not really afraid of death anymore. Like when I'm on a plane and it shakes, I'm like, who cares? I've done some things, so I'm at that point.
Thank you.
How about imposter syndrome? I remember going to this talk with Wei-Sin Choi, and he had written like a bunch of books at that point, and he said that he still like suffered from imposter syndrome. How was that for you?
What is that? What do you mean by imposter syndrome?
like
I
you-
know what some people mean.
Yeah, like you have all of these like amazing books that have done really well, but you can still feel like I don't really belong, or they're not that good, like people are going to find out I'm a big fraud, that kind of thing. Or do you have a healthy dose of narcissism? Because you need to have some.
It goes back and forth. Like, yeah, occasionally, early in the mornings. Like I was telling you before, like when I wake up in the morning, when I wake up at like 11, I'm like a vampire. I'm like allergic to the sun. It's hard for me. It's hard for me now in a church. So I wake up at 11 or 12, and then I spend 2 hours just miserable and like, why? Like everything seems negative in the books. I'm like, ridiculous. Like, I'm a loser. And then like I text, you text all those people and you're like, that will write you back the opposite. I'm like, I decided I'm a loser. You wait, ding. How could you think that, Heather? You're the greatest. I'm like, I know. Okay, I'll get out of bed, 1 foot. So yeah, it's just part of being a human. And then anytime, my thing is that when I feel like when I get something that triggers that feeling of being a loser, I just treat it like the flu, and I know it's going to last 24 hours at most, no, at least. It's going to be definitely 24 hours. It might be a hangover for 3 days. It might be a 24-hour flu or a 3-day flu. But I just know that's like the cost that
It'll
comes.
pass.
It'll pass, yeah. Because anything with rejection or like something you wanted to happen that doesn't happen, then you get that like blue feeling. And it's like once it starts, you just have to like
Just go to bed.
Here we go. Then you're just miserable, and it's like, yeah, you just lie in bed like, why bother? Why do I bother?
Okay, more questions?
Hi. I love the way you represent Montreal, and I love kind of seeing Montreal through the eyes of your characters. And I'm just wondering, since you've lived there for so long, how or has your relationship with the city changed? It seems to be this continuing source of inspiration, but I just wonder, is it different? Is the Montreal you look at today different from the one you experienced as a teenager and as someone in your 20s and so on?
Yeah, it's a very, I guess it's a different city. It's definitely less grungier, but it's still kind of grungy. There's something, like I've always lived either in the Lower Plateau or Mile End, which has always been like this artistic kind of hub. And because the apartments were just so ridiculously cheap until about 3 years ago. So there was just always art being built there. And I think I grew up with that sense of like watching all art being built. Like even when, I remember as a little kid, like I would go to St. Louis Square and there would just be different performers and like with accordions or women dancing or like puppet shows and clowns and just everybody doing performances. And it really gave me, that's where I got my love of the theater, was just watching street performers. So, I don't know, like, it was kind of funny, because the other day, like, so like the Cirque du Soleil, they were like, we're gonna do this, they have this but it's like everything with the circus in Quebec has to be like too big, the suspenders. Wow. That's how I was described the Cirque du Soleil. I'm like, oh God, I hope they don't do that. This part. But, oh yeah, so they were like, in the summertime, they wanted to close down or like block off the block that I was born and do these like installations where they projected the Montreal from my books onto them. even though this was the block that I lived. So it's like, and then they were going to have these circus performers and stuff. And then they kind of made like this kind of film of it. And so they wanted me to see it in this with these virtual reality glasses. And then I looked, and it was like so much. It was just like dancers and like guns, and it was all this stuff. And I was like, what the hell is this nonsensical universe I've created? This has nothing to do with reality. And then it was so much, then like I passed out because I fainted from the strobe lights. And then I woke up, and there's like all these people from the Cirque du Soleil around me, and they're like, well, how did you like it? I was like, it's too much, guys. It's too much. And they're like, wait, what? C'est trop, hein? We can't have people coming and passing out like this on the street. Nope, too much, too much. I'm like, cut it down by half. But anyways, all this to say that, like, I've taken so much free license with the city that I think a lot of people, when they think of the Montreal I've created, it's this Montreal through just these rose-colored glasses, something that I, like, how I saw it as a child, which I find peculiar.
Okay, thank you. More questions? Don't be shy. And you know that you're going to ask your question, and you're going to ask A, B, and you're going to get X and Y and Z in your answer. So you ask a question.
We're done.
Are we done? Anyone else? Yeah, there's one more.
Hello, what a pleasure to meet both of you tonight. Going back to the beginning with the narcissistic people in your lives, and maybe in my own life, I won't go as far as narcissistic, but maybe dysfunctional. So I have this fear of these experience I have of dysfunctional childhood experience making its way into my writing, whether it's a novel or a short story. And I wonder, how did you navigate that? Because it seems that some of those experiences, if not the actual events, but the feelings and the descriptions, or how characteristics of real people are making it into the characteristics of your characters. Was there any sense of you had to get over guilt or fear, or you just did it?
So what was the question? Did I have to get over guilt?
Did you experience any, like, getting these characters into the page and knowing you were using maybe real people's characteristics? Did you experience any guilt? Did you experience any fear with that?
Oh, no, not at all. But I know a lot of writers do. I don't, because I'm like, that's all I was left, was this nonsensical life. So I will use it as I please. But how do you feel about that?
About what?
Do you feel like guilty using drawing from life in your work?
I don't, I'm really cautious about not doing that with like live people. Although, you know, in my recent poetry, there is some of that. I agree. I think it's our experience, it's our lives, and people gave us lots of things in our childhoods that are now fodder. And sometimes it's expressed in these really direct ways, and sometimes they get woven into like fairy tale-like scenes, right? I think more, for me, it would be that I would feel a little triggered, and like it's, you know, with trauma, you know, you're always kind of peeling that onion, and so sometimes I'll write something and I'll be like, oh, I'm at that layer? I didn't know that layer was there. And then, you know, I have shit to deal with. I don't know if that happens for you.
Yeah, what happens to me is I get triggered, and then like I just then I'll write like just this crazy nasty rant about like I hate everybody, and then but then all of that just gets cut out, but that's almost part of the process where you just like get upset and you start writing crazy stuff.
Yeah, and maybe there's like a line or two that might suit a character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a great question. Another one back there, yeah.
Hello. I have a question about your editing process. How do you know when you're working through versions of your novel when you finally landed on the one and editing is finished?
Honestly, like now, my editor tells me. That's like the benefit. Like the first novel, God knows. It's like, but when I have a relationship with my editor, and well, before anything goes to publication, like you're always, I don't know about you, but I always every time I hand in a draft, I'm like, just praying they'll write back an email saying like, Heather, my God.
Brilliant.
This is so good. I wouldn't change a word. You got it this time. Let's go straight to publication. But that never happens, and I get back like, wow, okay, what time can we talk? And the worst
Heather,
question.
we have to talk.
The worst question, I don't know if you get this, but the question I hate most from my editor is like, what are you trying to do with that? I'm like, oh, God. Where are you going with, what's that all about?
Right.
Basically, they're saying, like, this makes no sense to me, you know?
How many drafts would you be doing before you send it to the editor the first time, would you say?
A lot, but it's hard to say if it's a draft because it's a tinkering draft.
Yeah.
Like, I just tinker with it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
And you have to tinker with it until you can't figure out anything else to do. Like, if you come across a passage that feels weird or dull or strange to you, there's more tinkering, right?
Yeah, and then oftentimes when I get to a point like I all of a sudden hate the book, then I send it to the editor because there's nowhere for me to go at that point other than to just like delete the whole thing. So I'm like, this all sucks, every single line. Well, it's time for someone else to read it.
Any more questions? Oh, there's one over here again.
I was wondering if you read a lot of the discourse about your novels and critique and how you feel about critique. Is that difficult to digest when so many people are reading your work?
Do I read critiques of my novel?
I mean, do you read everything that's out there, all the reviews and,
Absolutely not. Do you? I don't. I'll read I'll get the gist. My eyes will glance over it. I'll get the gist of it. I'll send it to my daughter and I'll ask her to read it and if it's good or bad.
I read everything.
Oh, look at you, masochist. You can ask Farzana then friends about that question.
If there's something that is really troubling or the critique was really bad, I don't spend much time. I read it once and I won't read it again. I know not to be too big of a masochist, and you don't promote it. Like you would never send a link around. Like you just let that one die, and you promote all the good reviews. Also, when you have enough distance from it, you can see, was there a kernel of something that was useful in that review that maybe you want to think about for next time? Because you're always working on your craft. Like this is always a work in progress. Hopefully you're getting better and better over time. And so if someone picks on something, maybe there's something to look at, but maybe not. I think sometimes reviewers are just really triggered by books, and rather than sort through what that is for them or go to therapy, they will sometimes be really mean on the page. That has happened, people being really mean on the page. So don't be like that. That's not nice. So another question here. Pamela, how are we doing for time? We okay? Last question, okay.
Oh, good. Well, it's not really a question, to be honest. I kind of just realized who you are tonight. And I want to thank you, Heather, because my agent took my book. She was the first, and I chose her because she was the first person that could capture the book. And she said it's a cross between, and I don't know how you'll take this at all, but a cross between Lullaby for Little Criminals, which I had not read, and Big Fish. And I was
Okay.
like, that's it, exactly, that's it. So I want to say thank you. I thought I should say thank
But
you.
how would you know that's exactly it if you hadn't read it?
Well, then I read it. And then
Okay.
I saw Scott, and then I hired her. Yes, exactly. Yeah, I didn't know it. So
Okay.
thanks. Cheers.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, I guess we need to wrap up. Yeah? So why don't we just have a thank you for Heather O'Neill for sharing everything tonight.
And
It's
thank
wonderful.
you, Farzana.
Yeah, you're welcome. That was really fun.
I just want to say thank you to both of you. That was a wonderful conversation. And for you, those of you who want more of Farzana and Heather, they're both going to be at the festival tomorrow. Farzana will be on the poetry panel, and Heather will give us more details about her editing process tomorrow. So thank you all for coming, and there's books to be sold and signed by these writers. Thank you for coming. Good night.
Thank you, Pamela.